really good lineups. We've got Laura Riley from Belleville Community Garden, and we've got Aidan Mccartney from Storehouse, Belfast, Ian Withers, who's a farmer from Linlithgow Family, and Andrew Tomlinson, who's a trustee with the Welcome Centre in Huddersfield. And we've got a real, I guess, mix of people today talking about quite different things, and actually not just talking about, the classic with a lot of the kind of food work that's going on, that's about how do we market this to services, how do we reach bigger audiences, but actually how do we do some of this stuff more efficiently, and how do we use digital tools to make that happen. So this is going to be, for me, I think, a really interesting one. And there's loads of familiar faces in the room. So it's like organisations like Peak and Green Cody, Perth and Kinross Voluntary Actions. There's lots of interesting organisations doing lots of amazing work. So I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Laura from Belleville Community Garden. So they've been doing some really cool stuff. They've got a really interesting When I Work app that Laura's going to talk about for managing volunteer roles, but I'll not spoil it too much. I'll hand over just now.
Hi, Ross. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you very much for asking me to speak today. I haven't got any fancy slides or anything to show you. I just want to have a chat to see, what our experiences were, just in case there's anything there that interested people. I'll just tell you a bit about who we are and what we did during COVID. So Belleville Community Garden is a very small community garden, a site of urban green space in the middle of Greenock. It's unfortunately got apparently the most deprived postcode in Scotland, unfortunately, but for us it's a great place with really vibrant, interesting volunteers from all sorts of walks of life. Unfortunately though, during COVID, as well as having the worst postcode, we were also COVID's capital of Scotland, apparently, for the death rate that we had. So during the time of COVID, during lockdown, we were working all the time. I don't think I've ever worked so hard in my entire life, just doing what we can to help the local community. And part of that involved food. We'd already, as an organisation, set up 11 community fridge freezers, small ones all over Inverclyde, as part of our Climate Challenge Fund project. And when they closed, we then moved to think, right, what can we do to help the population? And that was to develop these food boxes. So that was 7 days worth of food, included fresh food, frozen food, ambient food, and some ready meals for people who had COVID and obviously couldn't get out. So that's basically what we did. We did produce just over 4,000 of these boxes, which had about 7 days worth of food. And we were delivering them all over Inverclyde. So obviously that was a whole logistics management setup that we had never anticipated getting into, and our job roles seemed to completely change overnight. So we needed to skill up very quickly. So what we did was we ended up having 2 sites. We've got quite a big office site actually here at Belleville with a training kitchen and 2 sort of quite large rooms, but because of social distancing we needed much more room than that. So then we moved into a big sports hall, and there was one weekend I was searching, thinking, gosh, how am I going to control all these different volunteers? At its height we had 200 new people registered on our book, so that's in addition to the volunteers that we would normally have day to day, and it was just a logistics nightmare. So I looked online and I saw an American app called When I Work. When I Work is an app that's basically for logistics and staff schedule management, although it can work just equally well, it seems, for volunteers. So this app is free to start with, although I think if you go above, I think it's either 60 or 80 volunteers or staff members, then you have to pay, and the rates of payment are quite steep, although we got a grant to cover it. So at one point when we had about 200 volunteers registered, I think it was every couple of months we had to pay about $200 to them. But to be honest, it was worth its weight in gold at the time. What it lets you do is it lets you differentiate between the sites. It means that the volunteers can register. You can put all their information on there, like next of kin and all that sort of thing. You can separate them into job roles. And what you can do is you can give members of staff particular sort of access to certain types of information. So I had access to everybody's information, and I could email or text them as per job role or all at once. So we had drivers, so I could text and email the drivers if I wanted to. We also had hygiene supervisors at one point. We had sort of packers, we had stackers, we had all sorts of these different job roles. But it was great to be able to communicate individually to them and not have to waste sort of communications for everybody all at once. They could also give you time off requests. So if they said, oh, this week I'm not feeling well, or I don't want to work this week, then they could put that into the system and that would be taken into account when their shifts came up. So that was really useful as well. The other thing was if they wanted to swap shifts, and there was a lot of that with 100, 200 people, it allowed a function to do that and you didn't have to control it. So they could advertise their swap shift to all of the other volunteers and someone could take that shift on. And again, you didn't have to be involved in it. For us, it really worked well. It saved us, to be honest, because I didn't know what we were going to do at one point. It was very valuable. I think there are some little tweaks which I've been in touch with them about, which where you put your schedule in, it has an ability to copy the week's schedule and copy it onto the next week. But just with one click of a button, which I did twice, it's very easy to delete everything that went before. And having to put in those schedules manually each day for all the different people working is an absolute nightmare. So hopefully they'll amend that and that'll make it a lot easier for all concerned. So I think that's in a nutshell how this app helped us with technology through COVID. And what we've done is we kept it on the back burner. And so if there's another second spike, we can quickly reactivate it and manage the volunteers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lorna. Any quick questions? We're going to have a chance for like 1 or 2 questions after each speaker, and then at the end, the 4 speakers will have more of an open discussion. Any quick questions for Laura? You can either ping them in chat or you can come on a video. Susanna's asking, sorry, what was the app called again? It's called When I Work. So wheniwork.com, and you'll be able to get access for that. Just out of interest, anyone want to kind of share, I mean, how are people doing that at the moment? So if I know for most food charities, logistics is your biggest headache. And I'd be interested to know what does that look like for most of you right now? Is it paper-based? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? Are you using an Outlook calendar? Are you using a tool like the one that Laura's described? Anyone want to share their experience? Oh, you're all being really shy in this wet afternoon. Okay.
Well, new audience, not used to sharing. So I'll share. So I volunteer for some food charities. Okay. So we still do Google Sheets. As someone said, Excel paper-based. So we tend to do Google Sheets so we can share amongst the volunteers who are online, and some volunteers just aren't online at the minute. So we do print them out, hand them around. Yep. I just wanted to pick up on something Laura said there that I think is really vital for people to remember. And that was she's feeding back to the software developer the things that she's found frustrating. It's very easy for us all to be frustrated by a piece of software and think there's no solution to that. But developers want their software to be as useful to you as it possibly can be. So if you feed back to them, they will iterate and improve their software. And the more you do that, actually, the more that piece of software is tailored to your individual charity. Because if you're the only ones feeding back, they're going to develop it in the way that you want. So I do encourage you to do that if you are using software, if you have any frustrations with it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Geraldine, you were going to share something as well. Now you're on mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, that's what we've been. It's like paper, phone, text, email, word of passing messages on, etc. So it never occurred to me that there was an app or something that could do that. Especially like if you could email or text all at the one time, or yeah, I've spent many hours. You know, I mean, we've maybe about 60, 70 active volunteers, but I suppose the ones that we've been working with over the crisis, maybe talking about maybe 15, 16. So even that was hard to manage. So yeah, really good to hear that there's something.
Good. Charlie from Peak has said they use a mix of Excel, paper-based, and Bright HR. I've never heard of Bright HR, so that's interesting. So Charlie, I don't know if you want to stick the link to Bright HR in the chat. That'd be really useful for other people, I'm sure. I know we had, Jen, who works with Refugees, been on before, so they use a really simple Trello board for organising incoming orders, and that ties in an automated SMS function. So if someone's like a volunteer driver, they'll get an automated SMS update to say there's an order ready to be collected, here's the address, and that's all tied in a really simple Trello board. I think one of the things to remember as well is, depending on budget and what skill set you've got in house, is that ability to knit together a couple of systems to get that end product, rather than always thinking we're either doing it a really kind of old school way, maybe we're using paper, or we have to get something that's quite big and quite expensive, which is good if you've got the budget. For some of you, it might involve maybe making two tools work together effectively. Derek's also said, also from Peak, relying heavily on WhatsApp to get relevant information across, which is really good. Yes, I've heard of quite a few social enterprise food places using WhatsApp to communicate with people maybe working at different locations. Maybe they've got a food van, maybe they're doing food deliveries, and that's a really quick, rapid fire way of talking about availability amongst a group of people. Charlie says WhatsApp is as effective as it is problematic. Okay, we can maybe pick that out in the discussions. And Derek's also given that a thumbs up, so that's yeah. So we can maybe chat about that later. Okay, cool. Okay. So our next speaker is Aidan Mccartney, who's volunteer manager at Storehouse Belfast, and he's going to talk about how a new volunteer helped them get their digital platform up and running, so managing the new food parcel home delivery service during the lockdown. So this should be a really interesting one. I will pass it over.
Thanks, Ross. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for having me across the water in Scotland. Hard to get there physically at the moment, but it's lovely to tune in to you all on Zoom. For those of you, well, I imagine most of you maybe haven't even ever heard of Storehouse in Belfast. Storehouse was set up in 2008, pretty much just as a food bank. We were probably first, or if not first, one of the first food banks in Belfast. But we've kind of evolved quite a lot since then. We now exist to build communities that encourage the significance in everyone. We do this through, I'm getting heckled by my son here. All right, see. Getting heckled by my son here because I'm being too noisy. So we do this through provision. So we provide good quality essentials, food, clothes, furniture, household goods. We do this through community. So we create community spaces, community breakfast, dinners, opportunity for people to volunteer with us, things like that. And we also have a growth program, which involves English classes for asylum seekers. And we have a guitar club, we have an art class, etc., etc. Now, as imagine, everybody had it in March time, lockdown hits. It makes a lot of those things incredibly difficult. And so basically we were stripped back to purely an emergency food service, back to our days of 2008 of just being a food bank. So we recognised the need immediately, and that there was going to be a need for a home delivery service, which is not something that we'd done before. It was always the model of people come in to us. So we had a lot of volunteers who had maybe been teaching people guitar or English or cooking bacon buddies at our community breakfast, who were now saying, what can I do for you? I really want to help. So we were saying, well, we need people to deliver food bags. But it was this whole new wave of volunteers who hadn't necessarily been involved in our food end of the operation. We also had a lot of goodwill from across the city of people saying, I've never volunteered with you before, but I'd love to help. So what we needed was a very simple system to be able to get all these volunteers to get the food that we had out to the people who needed it. So fortunately enough, we were blessed with a volunteer who has a background in web design. So a couple of us sat down with him and said, this is kind of what we need to do. We need some sort of web platform that people can log in, get their deliveries, get their address details, disappear off, do their deliveries, tell us on the platform that they've been done, or if they haven't been done, why they haven't been done, what the problem was. And then they can log off at the end, and all people's data, addresses, etc. is safe. So our volunteer went and did an amazing job turning this around, probably in less than a week. He worked on it. So our referral system was still the same. We have about 200 charity and agency partners across Belfast who referred people into us. I, as staff member, put details onto the web system and then assigned it to a delivery driver who automatically got an email saying you have a delivery waiting for you on the system. They then had to go and log in to find out who it was and what the details were. They go out and do their delivery, mark it complete, or they can put a note on to say there was a problem, the person wasn't in, whatever it was. So very quickly, within a couple of weeks, we were doing some 50, 60 deliveries a week. We have 3 staff members, 2 of them have young children, including myself, as you just heard. So we were working from home most of the time, homeschooling. We just couldn't physically be out there doing deliveries necessarily, but we had a lot of volunteers who could. So it was a good way to harness that. The creation of the system also allowed us to take on other things. So we were able to upscale it quite easily. So in Northern Ireland, we have the Department for Communities who were responsible for getting shielding boxes out to people and boxes out to vulnerable people in their relevant areas. So we worked with the Department for Communities and Belfast City Council to deliver to 136 asylum seeker families on a weekly basis. So when that was needed, we were able to immediately say, yes, we can do it. It's much bigger than we've done before, but we have a system that will be able to cope with it. We recruited further more drivers, and we were able to upscale that really easily because of the system that we had in place. And we'd also just touch on just the simplicity of it as well. We had training that I'd set up, a Zoom training for all the new delivery drivers. Probably every time I delivered it, it was pretty much less than half an hour. The actual system demo was about 5 minutes. The rest of it was all, here's the PPE you need to wear, here's the protocols you need to abide by, here's the do's and don'ts. So it really made it really accessible for people to jump in and help out in. So we're really grateful for that. So it just, I guess the three big things for me with that system were its simplicity, the fact that we're able to upscale as required, and we're now downscaling a bit, thankfully, because it's not we're not in the same situation we were in April, May time, and also just the protection of personal data, the GDPR thing that we're all very aware of at the minute. It can be difficult when you have spreadsheets flying around on people's emails and printing them out, and with addresses for the deliveries they have to do. They're leaving them on the dashboard of their car after the deliveries are done, etc. You know, it's just so much easier for us to just have you log in, you get what you need, and then you log out again, and it's all protected in that way. Should say that every person's login only allowed them to access the deliveries that they were doing, so they couldn't go on and see everyone else's deliveries and therefore everyone else's addresses and phone numbers. So they were only able to access the information that they needed to complete their deliveries. So that's about all I have to say at the moment. I'm happy to take questions now or at the end, or back to you, Ross.
Thank you. That was great. Any questions for Aidan? Is any coming from chat as well, Siobhan, that you've seen?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button there. No, so the chat wasn't specifically about Aidan's talk there. It was about another piece of software, Telegram. So we'll have a chat about that afterwards at the end. So yeah, I just wondered how Aidan found working with a web developer, because we've almost shied away from that and tried to encourage people to use like tools that are already out there that are free and written, rather than having something quite so bespoke. So how was that part of the journey for you?
So I guess because Johnny, who developed it, was one of our existing volunteers and we had a good relationship with him already, he understood the organisation and what we were trying to do. I find it quite easy, really. I can't say for somebody that maybe you don't know, or like bringing in someone from the outside without that background. You know, so, but certainly it was really easy. I should have said we were able to make a few different changes as we went along, because we were able to just go back to Johnny and say, hey, this isn't working, or we need to add this on. And that was always really easy. And of course, because he was volunteer and he was volunteering his time, the cost was, we got him a wee present, but you know, the cost was effectively nothing. So that was really good for us.
That's brilliant. That's great to hear. And I think that's like a really kind of key point for everyone to bear in mind. You could have a volunteer out there who has these skills that you need. So, and in your staff base as well, people have hobbies that you might not know about. So we do always recommend kind of do that baseline survey, reach out to your volunteers and your staff to say, is there any digital tools that you use? Do you know how to manage data? Do you do Excel spreadsheets? Do you do web development? Whatever it might be, they are there and they can help you. So even if you as an organization are quite new on your digital journey, you will have people in your network who can help you. And then if you don't, reach out to people like SCVO and Third Sector Lab, because if you're struggling with something, someone else will previously have struggled with that same thing and found a solution. So we'll be either aware of that or we can seek out that solution. And if it's a digital one, then we can run training sessions to help you all kind of integrate that into your own systems. But as Aidan says, you could have volunteers there with those skills already.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth saying as well, actually, I mean, how many people in the room are using WordPress for their CMS, for their website? Just got a show of hands. People might not know what the CMS of the website is, but if you do know, right, there's a few hands right up there. So it tends to be the most, I mean, it's the most commonly used in the world, it tends to be the most commonly used in the third sector. What I would say, and actually Laura's mentioned this already, is there's something that's like a halfway house between paying a kind of monthly fee for a bespoke platform that's online and kind of third-party tool, or getting something bespoke and built yourselves, and actually just expanding the capabilities that WordPress has got. And there's been a lot more kind of booking and scheduling types of third-party plugins for WordPress that have come out during COVID, and some of them are really, really good. And actually just with a wee bit of technical know-how, or if you're working with a third-party developer, you can get something that feels fairly bespoke fairly quickly on a WordPress site. And again, the benefit of that is you then don't have the high monthly fees that you might have from something that you're paying a kind of per user cost on, because those kind of like £2.50 per user and you've got 100 staff and volunteers, it can be quite a lot of money quite quickly over the course of a month. So it's worth just keeping that in mind. Okay, right, I'm going to stop off there. Siobhan,
I've got a quick question for Aidan before we move on, which is, I like the fact that your initial system was quite simple and that you just had one quite well-defined job you needed it to do. And I wonder if you had to have a bit of a discussion or negotiation to keep it that simple, or were there other features you said we could do this, but we're going to leave it until a future point?
Yeah, so it kind of touches on what Ross was just talking about as well. So we have quite an elaborate bespoke system for our Storehouse centre when we have visitors in. So tracks what, you know, in terms of the clothes and furniture, tracks everything that they get, notes on other issues that have been highlighted or that they've been signposted on for, or that sort of thing. So one of the discussions we had at the start was, do we just add something on to that? And so that was developed by a professional web developer, and we have updated things on that system before, and it can generally take, you know, a few weeks to get that added on. So at the end of March, it just wasn't really an option to wait to have that added onto our existing system. But with having Johnny on hand there offering his services, we took him up on it, and it did really keep it much simpler. because if we'd given people a login to the other system, they would have to go in and find the new bit and work out how that ties in with all the rest of it. So I think the simplicity of it was one of the best things about it. And as I say, it was a 5-minute demo for the training rather than half an hour to get people up to speed on it. I'd also say that a lot of our delivery drivers are maybe only doing it once a fortnight, say. So in that time you can forget. I mean, they forget their passwords in those times. So, so they might forget where they're supposed to find something, and then that becomes labor intensive in and of itself, because you're taking phone calls from people going, I can't get on, I can't find this, and I can't find that. So it has to be something simple, I think.
Brilliant. To answer your question, John? Yeah, cool. Okay. So we're going to move on to our third speaker. So Ian Withers is a farmer with Linlithgow Farm. So he's going to talk about how they've been using Facebook. In particular, they've been using the WordPress plugin WooCommerce, which has a ton of flexibility built in. So it's really interesting one for a lot of you in the room. So I'll hand over to Ian just now.
Hi folks, yeah, I'm Ian from Narrowboat Farm, and Narrowboat Farm is a market garden near Linlithgow. It's kind of socially and environmentally focused, but it is a private business. It's not a social enterprise or charity as such. And that kind of opened up one of the kind of best opportunities with the Farmily project. Because as a small private business, essentially you can have an idea one moment and put it into action the next second without having to really worry about your remits or your funding or things like that. So the opportunity that we had as a market garden at the start of lockdown, we suddenly had dozens and dozens of people queuing at the gate wondering where the vegetables were. So there's real issues with food security at the start of lockdown. As a seasonal veg producer, there was no way we could kind of provide for folks. So we decided to try and support people to grow their own. And that's where the Farmily project came from. So the kind of vibe of Farmily is it's a kind of a friendly, inclusive, breaking down the barriers for the kind of knowledge of how to grow your own veg. And we essentially started up a Facebook group for that. Gathered together half a dozen kind of key experts who really knew their stuff. I made sure that it was really kind of personalized. So rather than just point people towards here's a grow your own video, this kind of thing, we were specifically making videos and putting together starter packs for people and delivering these starter packs to people who were shielding and things like that. So just as a wee idea, within a week or two, there was hundreds of folk joining it. And now in the wee town, there's about 300 and odd kind of mini farms. So people's lawns are now kind of mini farms that have sprung up. So I thought it might be quite useful if I can share my screen and actually show you the Facebook group itself. If this is possible. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So using Facebook, the reason we did that is because we couldn't invent something and create something, because it's all kind of, no one's paid, it's all volunteer. So using the existing Facebook group, one of the interesting things you can do with this now is you can make learning units. So basically you can create as many units as you want within a group, and you can get people to go through these one by one. So looking at the kind of behavior change for folk to get more confident at growing their own, we would go through stages from literally how to sow your seeds right through how to harvest, that kind of thing. Now, one of the problems with Facebook groups when you get shed loads of people is that you end up having the kind of discussion tab with kind of a myriad of content that people can't sift through. So one thing you can do with that, which is quite key, is you can make things announcements and you can pin things to the top, and that so you can rather than it just being that kind of crazy melee of content, you can control it to a certain extent. Right, I'm going to fail technologically slightly here, trying to get out of a shared screen. Don't have a Scooby how to do that, so you might be stuck on that for a bit.
The red stop button, Ian. There should be a wee red stop.
Oh, there we go. Cool. Thank you. So as well as that, what I wanted to show you was also the WooCommerce plugin that we've been using. So if I go to share screen again on that, hopefully this will show you. So yeah, again, without trying to create any software, we basically had a WordPress site already and did the WooCommerce plugin. And essentially it just dealt with, we just uploaded the things that were available. And everything we've done is kind of a pay what you want type thing. So we could upload that, roughly what it costs us to buy in, and then people could buy it, and it would just give us a spreadsheet of everything to deliver to folk. So again, just a kind of another, in terms of operating quite quickly, to be able to do that, super easy. The only other real kind of digital tool we've used in terms of our kind of team behind the scenes. So we've got about half a dozen of us now, and we're just using the usual Messenger and WhatsApp and those tools to be able to communicate. You know, it's all very kind of off the cuff, quick, dare I say, cowboy around the edges type thing, which is kind of the beauty of it as well, because folk kind of appreciate that, and they know that this isn't some professional setup, that we're all just folk kind of mucking in together to make it work. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Can you give us a wee bit of a background? It'd be interesting to know kind of how you got to selecting WooCommerce and if there were other options on the table before you got to that point. So I think for a lot of people, this is actually the most difficult part, is not necessarily the implementation of the system, but actually being like overrun by choice and then making a decision on what that is. So it'd be interesting to know what the process was.
As easy as we knew someone who had used it and it worked. And then when you go into the kind of behind the scenes in WordPress and you search for the plugins, you look for the reviews, you can quickly see the ones that are really glitchy and have got a lot of problems. There's a free version of WooCommerce, but we paid the 30 quid just to have the full version. And I think even the ones that are quite cheap, if you're paying a wee bit, or you know that they're really busy ones, you know that there's developers there fixing the glitches, rather than these ones that claim to be amazing and great, and then actually it's just someone at home but on their own who can't fix anything. So yeah, that's what we went for Woo.
Yeah, that's good, a bit of advice. Yeah, one of the things I like about WooCommerce is it works with a lot of third-party tools. A lot of the kind of major payment processors integrate really seamlessly with it. It also integrates with other plugins. So if you've got say like an events plugin or a calendar plugin and people need to book like 1 hour slots, you can integrate it with WooCommerce so that they can automatically pay for a slot or whatever it is that they happen to be paying for. So it works really nicely with a whole range of different tools. Anyone else in the room using WooCommerce on their sites? Anyone out there? Oh, Laura's using it as well. Laura, do you want to quickly tell us a wee bit about how you guys are using it?
Oh, yeah, so we had, again, a developer friend who very kindly helped us develop something, and we basically used it as an order form to order our boxes. But actually, as I put in the chat earlier, we chose not to have people doing it themselves. We chose that because of the distress people seem to be in, they seem to be asking for a lot of other help apart from the food boxes. So we actually outsourced our telephone capacity to another charity, kindly took that on, and they were able to signpost people. So we we had a form in the background though, which really helped.
Yeah, and we kind of keep talking about this throughout the calls, but trying to really focus on forms in your organisation and getting them tight, and it feels like such a small thing, but that can be the difference between someone transacting with you and not transacting with you. And running testing on those forms, so using tools like Hotjar, which are free at charities, and it's got a really nice forms analysis tool built into it. So I can see that if I worked for Laura's charity and there's a food box form, I can see that 40% of the people get to question 6 in the form, and that's the point at which they drop off and they don't complete it. And maybe there's been a question that's mandatory about a health condition or something else, and you need to make it optional, or you need to make it a drop down where people select from 4 options. That ability to quickly change things based on how people are actually using the tool, rather than just sticking a form up and kind of hoping it works, but never actually using any kind of feedback or insight to tweak it as you go, it can make a huge difference. And not just for kind of some of the food stuff you're doing, volunteer recruitment forms, fundraising forms as well. Okay, so we are now into our final speaker. So Andrew Thompson is a trustee with the Wellcome Centre in Huddersfield. He's going to talk about how they've been using data to work more effectively with food bank clients. So it's going to be a really interesting one. I think this will be applicable to a lot of people in the room. So I'll hand you over to Andrew just now.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm a trustee for the Welcome Centre in Huddersfield, which is a relatively large but local food bank in the Kirklees area, which covers Huddersfield and the area to the south of Huddersfield. And we've been operating for about 20 years, and over that period of time, we've seen, like all food banks, we've seen our usage increase quite dramatically. And over the last year, for example, we probably gave out enough food for about 250,000 meals. So we're quite, although we're an independent food bank and relatively small compared to some of the other kind of players in the food bank sector, like the Trussell Trust, we are quite large within our local area. What I've been involved for about eight years, and what I found when my background is software engineering and IT. What I found when I started with the Welcome Centre was that we had a card index system. That was the way that we kind of kept data on our clients and recorded information about their usage of our food bank. We use a referrals based model, so that we receive referrals on behalf of clients from other organisations. They've identified a need in the client for our help, so they refer them to us, and we provide them with the support that we can do. Because of that, we keep some records on our clients, both in terms of simple things like name and address, but also things like dietary requirements. So if they return back to us, we can we know what their preferences are, and also kind of reasons for referral and that type of thing. And the reason why we do all that is so that we can produce reports and have an idea basically about how our service is being used. I'm going to try and share my screen if that's okay. So this one here. So listening to everybody else has made me realise how old-fashioned we are at the Welcome Centre. We do have an IT system which I helped implement, and we introduced it in 2014. It's not online. It's not on the web. It's a bespoke piece of software. And we use that to manage all our interactions with our clients. And it's been very helpful to us because it's allowed us to gain an understanding of how our clients use our service. So this is our typical client journey. We get a referral for a client, we put the details in our system. That results in some food parcels being prepared, and then later the client comes to collect those, collect the food pack. During COVID and going on now as well, we do everything by home delivery, so everything is remote. So we still get referrals over the telephone. The food parcels are prepared and then they're delivered the following day. Originally, we were working in partnership with the council, who provided us with some of their staff to deliver the food parcels to clients. Now that the lockdown has eased to a certain extent, that delivery now has been taken over by our volunteers. And one of the things that we've been able to do with the data that we have is that we've been able to kind of understand the shape of the demand for our service. And what we can see, I really like this graph. This really shows you how our clients, but I think it's probably more typical of food bank clients more generally, how they use and how they interact with the food bank. So what you'll find with the food bank is that a lot of clients, almost half of the clients in our case, we might only see them once in any 12-month period. But at the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, there's a few clients who we'll see very regularly within a 12-month period. So if you look at the blue line there, that's the distribution of the clients who we see, and the relative percentage of clients based on the number of referrals we receive for that client over the period of 12 months. So Most clients are clustered towards the bottom end. We receive relatively few referrals for quite a lot of clients, but then there's, as I said, there's a small number of clients that we see very more regularly. And one of the things that you have to be worried about with food banks, and I'm sure other people who are involved with food banks will agree with this, is that there's a risk of dependency, that the clients become dependent on the food bank to support them. And whilst that's not the case for the majority, so for the clients who we only see once or twice in a 12-month period, there's a risk that the clients who we might receive more referrals for, there's a risk that they start to become dependent and move towards being regular visitors to the food bank. And that's not helpful. It's not helpful for the client, because we're just perpetual, whatever their underlying issue is, we're just supporting them and not helping them to address their underlying issue. And there's also, it's not really helpful for the food bank as well, because what we found from the data that we've collected through our system, that 20% of our effort is spent supporting just 4% of our clients. So we operate 5 days a week. So if you imagine one day out of every week, we are spending all our time just looking after 4% of our clients across the whole year. So there's a need to try to make sure that you reduce the risk of clients becoming dependent on the food bank. And we implemented a kind of revised business process to try to address that, which is that we can, when we receive a referral from a client, in addition to preparing a food parcel for them, there's also an opportunity for them to have a conversation with our support worker around particular support that they might benefit from. And this could be relatively simple things, like a lot of the time just simple advice about benefits and about what a client is entitled to will allow them to kind of resolve the client and not resolve their issues, and not need to come to us again. And we can signpost to other organizations, we can do a little bit of advocacy, we can identify grants. So this kind of revised model, where the food is part of a more holistic process, has worked very well for us. And what we've been able to do with our IT system, one of the problems that we had when we moved to this revised model was that we found that it was very difficult to identify the clients who would benefit the most from a conversation with our support worker. It's clearly, if you look at the shape of our demand, the clients who are only going to see once in 12 months, they probably wouldn't benefit because they've got an immediate need, and once they've received support from us, their crisis is resolved. And similarly, the clients at the top end, who we see regularly every couple of weeks, they have probably got underlying issues which make it very difficult to provide meaningful support. It's more the clients in the middle, and how do we identify those clients as being someone who would benefit from our support on perhaps their first or second visit? And this is where we worked with another charity called DataKind UK that use a pool of data scientists to analyze data and to produce models which represent behavior, essentially. And what we were able to do was provide them with the data that we'd collected through our client referral system, and it allowed them to create a model for us, which then identified the types of characteristics that a particular client who would benefit from support would exhibit when they visited us on their first or second referral. And we now use that model, that service provided by these data scientists at DataKind, we've modified our system to allow it to kind of flag up when we get a referral for a client as to flag that client up as being somebody that the support worker might be interested in talking with. So it's a kind of decision support tool that that we developed with the help of DataKind. I'll just stop sharing my screen. So so I've just given you a little bit of background. All our IT is not web-based. It's kind of bespoke, more traditional client-server type of application, but it allows us to record a lot of information, and we can use that information both at an operational level and at a strategic level to help us with our decision making. And probably the biggest message that I'd like to communicate is that there's a lot of pushback against the idea of recording information about client usage of food banks, because it tends to be a feeling that it's all to do with rationing and limiting. But actually, by recording information on client usage and background information about the reasons why clients are being referred to the food bank, this really helps you both in terms of being able to understand the usage that's being made of your service, but also in terms of giving you insights of how you can better support the clients. So just because you're collecting data doesn't mean it's a negative thing. It's not necessarily about rationing. You can use the data for good. And that's what we do within the Welcome Centre. And finally, I'd say that using data can be done at many levels, and it's kind of better to kind of get the basics right first. So create a database for recording information, record basic things first, and then move to kind of higher levels of sophistication once you've got everybody got the buy-in and you've got the basic level working. So I'll finish there, and maybe people might have some questions.
That's brilliant, and thank you so much for that. And just like a perfect example of moving away from seeing data as a digital filing cabinet towards using it to make actual decisions about the types of support people need. So that's really, really useful.
Oh, thank you.
Any questions for Andrew at all? Do people, can I just, I guess, ask questions for people in the room? Do people feel that that's where they want to get to with data in their organisation, that they want to get to a point where strategic decisions about how you support people are being made based on the data that you hold? And do people feel, so Geraldine's nodding, do people feel that they're kind of close to that point yet, or they've still got a way to go? Geraldine's shaking her head. Now, Geraldine, do you want to tell us a wee bit about kind of what data looks like in your organisation, or where you'd like to get to?
I struggle with this, even with a spreadsheet. So, well, I suppose in our organisation we have different we've lots of different projects. It's not all about food insecurity. So I suppose there's different types of data collection. So in terms of our energy advice service, they've got a really slick system, whereas us, we're kind of basically make things up. I don't mean make things up as you go along. I mean we design a system, but it's basically spreadsheets, and perhaps that is because I'm not very digi savvy. If I was a digi savvy person, then maybe we would have completely different systems. But this is really, really useful because I know that there's tools out there that we could all come together and look at to help. But yeah, the data collection. I mean, we have a rule of trying not to collect too much information, but trying to collect the best kind of information so that we kind of can draw a picture of people, and then as we're building up the relationship, we can develop that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and I think for me, it's not necessarily about using the most expensive CRM system. Anything has to be really complex and convoluted. And actually, for some of you, are going to be doing really interesting stuff with Excel. But I guess it's how do you draw those insights out of that data? John, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think Andrew's example is a really good one, and I think a point that DataKind themselves make as well when they're talking about it is what charities usually have and what's a really good starting point is a good focus question. So it might be, how might we know more about how people come in contact with us in the first place so that we can support them earlier, better? So that kind of question, you don't need to have any data or IT knowledge to frame that. It's about your own practice of how you're running your organization. Or the example that Aidan had was, how might we give our drivers the right information, but not in an insecure way? So that kind of starting point is one that you can shape yourself. And then if you've got the right partner in place, they can help you with the technical steps to achieve that. I think the other thing that's maybe worth highlighting with Andrew's story is that although they've begun in a basic way, they had been collecting data over a fair period of time. So they had a kind of solid building block to build on. And I think that's maybe a challenge that organizations are both facing at the moment is if your scale of service has grown very rapidly, you've maybe not had time to kind of gradually build it up. You're having to do it more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be interested, and I don't know if Andrew, this is something that you're doing, but the use of data visualization within food charities and being able, so if I'm a driver, being able to see at a glance the impact that we're having this week or how demand is changing throughout the week, or even board or kind of scheduling managers making decisions based on that. And I don't know, is that something that you use at all, Andrew?
No, that isn't. We don't have that level of sophistication. We modified our system so that we could print out lists of where the deliveries had to be made in the next day, and then the individual drivers would kind of order those based on their knowledge of the local area. I think probably given. I think that's probably completely sufficient, given the volume that we're doing. I don't think we need more sophisticated than that. Just going back to John's points, I think it is very important that you, as I tried to say in my summary, it's very important that you kind of start from a kind of simple level and get more sophisticated with this type of thing. We got DataKind involved when we'd had the client database system running for about 3 years, and it had been a struggle to get the system introduced and to get it accepted by our volunteers who were taking referrals prior to that completely manually on pieces of paper. And there's quite a resistance in terms of volunteer groups that maybe not IT savvy, and a bit reluctant to use that thing in the corner called a computer, and so you have to kind of build the relationship between your volunteers, your staff, and your IT over a period of time. And you can't go straight in at the deep end with something very sophisticated. You have to start with the simple things.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. Yeah, and particularly where some of these systems will have existed for a very long time in some of the charities that you're working with. Okay. I thought it'd be worthwhile opening up if anyone's got a question for any of the speakers. It doesn't need to be for Andrew, but any of the speakers that you've heard from today, or even if you just want to share a point or ask a more general question. So anyone want to jump in? You can either use chat or you can just unmute yourself and come in. Okay. Well, I heard a child in the background somewhere. I don't know whose it was. I don't know if it was John's got someone banging at the door there.
Maybe. I had just a quick question for Andrew again, was just the kind of ethics question and the unintended consequence question, because obviously there's going to be some characteristics of service users where it's perfectly fine to kind of analyze them and think about them, but there'll be others where if you set your model up the wrong way, you could end up just automatically always going and talking to a certain type of person right at the outset, which could be really problematic. And I wondered what work you've done on that.
Yeah, well, yes, it's a very good question. I mean, I think just to say at the outset that the tool that we developed is a decision support tool. It isn't the tool that's driving the support worker. The tool is an aid for the support worker to make the decision. So the ultimate responsibility lies with the person, not with the software. But yes, I mean, when we were developing the tool with the data scientists at DataKind, you know, we had some quite long discussions about ethnicity and whether that should be an indicator that was used to direct support, because when you looked at the types of client that were being recommended by the tool, some ethnicities had a greater representation in there than others. It wasn't a kind of match with the population at large, and you know, and that led to some kind of quite perhaps not uncomfortable, but perhaps slightly more difficult conversations. But I think you have to bear in mind as well that that you know, some groups are going to be overrepresented in terms of in terms of food bank use, and so you need to think about your specific population and how that population is you know, responds through the tool, rather than perhaps the more kind of general national population. So it might be that some, you know, so like we do work with a lot of with some asylum seeker groups. So it would be that at particular times, you know, we might have had a lot of referrals from people from Syria, for example. It's not, and you know, and the tool might be recommended people from Syria as being you know, recommended to have a support conversation, but the tool isn't necessarily favoring people from Syria. It's just that they're higher, a larger group within our population. So yeah, but I mean, yes, it's a difficult question. And just going back to what Aidan said, we do our bespoke system is we put a lot of effort into GDPR type of thing as well to make sure that all the sensitivity around the data we do record is properly managed. So, for example, things like client issues. You know, so a client might come to us with a particular issue that might be, for example, mental health, but we wouldn't necessarily want to have that marker against that client for forever. You know, there would be a period of time after which that marker would disappear from that client's record, or we'd review the next time they made a referral, would review their record to see if it was still accurate. So I think the GDPR side of things is very, very important as well. And you need to make sure that your IT can kind of like fully support.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat just to kind of bring into what Andrew's saying there. So we've spoken about the new tool from the Catalyst, DigiShift, which is specifically around safeguarding. Actually, some interesting stuff in there about storing of data and the types of data that you might want to keep in people. And the other one, which I will try and dig the link out, is SCVO's got a good kind of overall guide on cybersecurity, and obviously then links in there to the National Cybersecurity Centre's guide, which has got a kind of 10-point plan for charities, and there's a specific section in that on the storage of data and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate under GDPR. So that's definitely worth looking at, and particularly even if it's low-level health information like that, you are still storing health information on someone. So if you've said this person has come because they've got a mental health issue, however you classify it or talk about it, you're storing health information on someone. So you do need to consider that when you're thinking about how you keep that information. That's a really important point, Andrew. Okay, John's just put actually a link into the SEO one in the chat there, which is really useful. Siobhan, any final thoughts before we finish up today?
Yeah, so I know that question was based around GDPR, but I think Andrew's answer also highlights how useful data can be to you to enhance your own service. So the examples there were the Syrian refugees and the someone with mental health issues. So without that data, you might have a feeling that there were people with mental health issues that you were helping. You might have a feeling that suddenly there was a few more Syrians who you were supporting, but with that data, it not only gives you that absolute that yes, this is what's happening, but it then enables you to speak to your funders, to speak to other organizations, to be able to do more signposting and to have actual factual evidence behind that. Especially if you're getting your local council involved, and local council officers can then access further support, especially around refugees, getting extra people with language skills to come in and talk to them in their own language and to be able to offer them kind of more tailored support. So don't be scared of collecting data, because you can really use it for your own purposes, and to improve your funding and to tailor your service more. I thought it was really interesting that Andrew said at the start, from what he was hearing of what everyone else was saying, he feels the Welcome Centre is really old-fashioned in regards with IT. And here we are all being really impressed with how they're using their data. So I think that's just a really good message for us all to take. There might be some areas that we're really good at. There might be other areas that we feel like we're really behind and that we have to play catch up. So don't be afraid to reach out to each other and ask each other for help, because there'll be experts and there'll be learners, and we're all at different stages on all of those different avenues into digital and into using data more.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And particularly, I think in data, you know, trying to rush to buy a big, shiny, expensive system does not equate to someone using data effectively. We see that time and time again. So don't be afraid if you've got a hand-knitted, you know, 3 Excel spreadsheets and you use something free like Google Data Studio. Whatever you're doing, it's about how you're using it and how you're using it to make decisions. The platform, the tool is kind of irrelevant. So I think that's a really good point. There's a really specific questions coming from Derek. Any hints or tips on making recorded sessions for providing cooking lessons? So what platforms are people using and what application programs are good? So it'd be interesting to hear people in the room who have been using video content. What are your top tips? Anyone want to jump in with that? Because I know lots of you have been doing good video content. You're all like, we don't make videos, we don't do any cooking. What are you talking about? I know that you can do cooking videos. Right. Anyone want to jump in?
Might have a thought.
Yeah, go for it.
Ian, did you want to jump in on this one from the Nithco, or?
Yeah, sure. We have been doing some cookery videos and things like that. I just put a wee bit in the chat there. YouTube and YouTube Live is one of the best, because the thing with YouTube is it's got the best kind of search engine online. It's the most user-friendly. If you use Vimeo, it looks better, but less people can find your stuff. And also it's easy to embed in Facebook and WordPress plugins, which shows the whole video on there rather than sending you away to YouTube and that kind of thing. I think a combination of using the live, whether it is Facebook or Instagram, but also then that video being available later is good. That helps kind of increase your audience. But the danger with that is when it goes wrong live. So yeah, that can be fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you said YouTube, because I always say it and folk go, tell us some weird video platform that we should use. That just use YouTube, right? So YouTube's owned by Google. You'll get massive SEO benefits for your own site in terms of search rankings. And what you'll seen previously is when you make a search for certain terms, so John's really into cycling, so John wants to repair something on his bike. First thing he does is asks, how do I repair a broken derailleur? The top 6 results will be video content above the text content. If you've got good video content that answers specific queries, it can often leapfrog text-based search content that's been sitting there for years. So that's just worth thinking in mind. If you're answering really specific questions, whether it's food or if it's something completely different. More people make searches on YouTube than any other platform other than Google itself every day. So it's a search engine in its own right for a lot of people. In my mind, taking that information, there's no reason you should be using another video platform unless you're doing something that's sitting behind a paywall and is very bespoke, it's for your members. If you're doing something that's trying to reach as broad an audience as possible, Facebook's the platform you should be using. That said, if you have like a closed Facebook group, you should always be uploading that content natively to Facebook, because Facebook will treat that content, that video content, in its own platform more effectively in its algorithm than it will taking a third-party video from somewhere like YouTube. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if it's one platform, YouTube's the one that you should be you should be looking for. And also not underestimating the fact that YouTube is a community in its own right. For a lot of people interested in recipes or understanding how food banks operate, it is a social network, it's a community in its own right. It's not just a place to host videos. So just keeping that in mind when you're thinking about video content. There's someone, I can't remember, there's someone on a call previously that we had who was using Facebook Live really interestingly, where they were doing kind of cook-along, so like people were joining, and I don't know if you can remember the name of the organisation, Siobhan, but they're basically people would join, so you'd have 70 people join a Facebook Live video, and they would be in their own kitchens cooking along with it. But the benefit of that is you then have the Facebook Live video, which you can take and you can use it on your Facebook account, or you can import the video file and you can edit and upload it to your website or YouTube. And actually you've got content by carrying out the service you're going to carry out anyway. So for me, that can be a really good one. Derek, you should get Charlie in his food van, live stream the food van. That's what you should be doing. For those of you who don't know, Peak is a food van, which has the best food van name of any food van in the whole world, and it's called Pikachu. I don't know if it's gone as far as, does it have actual Pokemon graphics on it? It does, right, there you go. What more do you need to know? Excellent.
Hi, the group you were talking about was Belleville Community Gardens. I think Laura must have left the call. She's probably been called into the office because I used to work at Belleville until recently. So the app worked really well as me, for the volunteer coordinator, because we would have gone under. It was bad enough doing what I had to do without that. So it was really valuable, and I'm not very IT literate either. So, but yeah. Belleville, the Facebook Live cooking, they make sure people have the ingredients, the pots, the pans, everything. And they found it's a lot of young dads have really taken on board, which is lovely, cooking with their kids. Really cool. And Bev will also do Facebook, how to grow anything with what's in your kitchen or your cornflake box or whatever. And they're also doing like mindful walks. So they've been using it very, very well, and it's very well liked in the area. So yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, really, I thought the kind of scheduling app that they're using, I mean, these tools are prolific now and they seem really obvious, but still really underused in the third sector, and the amount of staff time it can save is phenomenal. So for me, I think actually, that's something that everyone in this room should be looking at, is what does scheduling look like for us? How much of a headache is it? And how do we implement a new system? Not doing it for the sake of it, but if that's a real pain point in your organisation, is maybe taking a trial of a system like that. Okay, any final thoughts from you, John, before we wrap things up?
Well, just to pick up on that last point you made, Ross, I think a really useful trick is often third sector organisations get stuck because they want something that's specifically for charities, but actually a much better way to think about what apps or platforms might be useful is to just think about what kind of problem we're trying to solve. So it might be rota management, or it might be giving drivers information. So if you can think about your problem as, what is the task we're trying to do? It doesn't have to have third sector branding on it. A fair few platforms do offer non-profit pricing. You can usually ask about that. But I think that's a much better way of finding something useful than waiting for something that's been built specifically for charities, because often they're a smaller product and they're not as up to date. So a lot of the really good platforms, the private sector has already used them and kind of tested them, so they're a kind of known quantity. Yeah, that's really good advice. And the other benefit of these tools is that you could shortlist 2 or 3, and actually if you're thinking internally and some people favour one over the other, is try out 3 of them on 3 separate small projects, or try one month and try a different one the next month and then commit. But your commitment tends to be a month-to-month cost rather than a really big upfront sunk cost with someone developing something bespoke for you that you don't know if it's going to work until it's actually delivered. So that ability to try things really quickly is a huge advantage. Okay, yeah. So Andrew's saying that food bank is half CRM, half warehouse management. That is so true. How would you integrate them? Yeah, it's a really good question. So these are all the kind of questions as well, and we're thinking about the stuff that is, you shouldn't be wrestling about this individually, is actually your board needs to be making some of these bigger decisions, and actually you might need to get into reserves to try out some of these tools and to test some of this stuff and to think about what it's going to look like. Okay, Siobhan, any final thoughts from you before we finish up?
Yeah, so we did promise Julie we would go back and talk about Telegram. So I'm just popping a link to a service recipe about Telegram into the chat just now. So a service recipe is basically a digital how-to guide written by one of our partners, The Catalyst. And the reason they've called them recipes is the way they look at it, it's different digital tools are different ingredients. So you can look at each recipe and pick out the tools from that recipe that you want to use, merge recipes together, swap out ingredients if you don't have all those tools, that sort of idea. So this particular recipe that I've put in the chat is about Chain, who are a women's abuse charity who use quite a lot of digital tools and use them incredibly well. And one of the tools they use is Telegram. So if you have a look through that recipe, Julie, that'll give you a lot more detail on Telegram. And Chain as a charity are very, very open to having conversations. So as we've said all throughout, if there's something you want to do, if there's a tool you want to use, someone somewhere will have already done it. And this is an incredibly good example because Chain will quite literally talk you through how they use it and help you develop it yourselves if you want to. They're a really supportive charity. The other question that came up in the chat was talking about WhatsApp and the use of that. I wondered if John or Ross wanted to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, in fact, well, Charlie's on. Charlie, do you want to tell us what your thoughts are just on the mixed bag nature?
Oh, sorry, I thought Charlie had gone. That's great. Do you want to talk, Charlie?
You might have gone, but Derek, I'm going to pick on you then.
In case Charlie's checking his WhatsApp. I think the plus side is it's very likely all your volunteers are using it anyway, so that's a big plus. It's also got a fair bit of functionality, so you can share links, you can share media, you can have groups, so you can have a broadcast list where that's like the equivalent of blind carbon copying an email, so you can notify all your staff without having them all be part of a group. The big downside is people are having to share their contact information with you, so if you've got a group of 8 or 9 volunteers, by doing it on a WhatsApp group, their numbers are visible to each other, so that's potentially a problem. And also for somebody to receive a message from a broadcast list, they need to be one of your contacts. So those are drawbacks, I think, which mean it's probably not great for like a long-term solution. And you can easily imagine circumstances if you had a volunteer group that was growing very quickly, it might be fine if there's only 5 people that know each other very well on a WhatsApp group. But if you had a group of over 50, some people would, I think, rightly say that's not okay for my personal number to be visible to that group.
Cool.
So yeah, that's a challenge.
Derek, I'm not picking you to speak on the video. If you want to put in the chat, if there's any specific questions about WhatsApp or any specific thoughts, then do please share. Right, Claire's got a quick question. We'll maybe take the 1 or 2 and then we'll finish up. So, a question about child safety. She's been advised to use Webex when delivering courses to young people. Now, this is my slightly facetious question for you all: is how many of you have teenagers in the house who cannot stay off Cisco Webex? Like, it is the platform they just love using every single day, right? So none of you have teenagers who just love Webex. I guess my question would be, why Webex, given that it's a very clunky kind of late 90s style IT system? My guess is, without bringing Claire on, and Claire can answer, is that it's often used. Discord's the one that's been mentioned, Christine, because that is the one that if you're a teenager, that's the one you use. Webex is used a lot in the public sector, and particularly in local authorities, because it's favoured by a lot of IT managers because they can basically control it in a lot of ways. It tends to not be a thing that many people actually like using as an end user. The classic thing, particularly with Webex, is you get invited to a Webex meeting and you have to download about 4 downloads to your computer before the thing will even start. It can be very slow and juddery. The interface is quite old school. Claire, are you still here? Have you run away?
Sorry, I'm still here. It's just, it was a few things. I know the schools didn't want to do any type of, when it was home learning, they were really reluctant to use Zoom or anything like that. And then when I was kind of supporting families, there was a lot of red tape in what platforms I was using. And finally, I got the green light to use Webex to work with the young people. So, and it is still a minefield, because I'm thinking, what platform is the best platform to use? And So I just thought this would be maybe a good idea to ask.
So there's two suggestions coming in the chat. So Christine's mentioned Discord. There's I think there might be, is there an LGBT Youth Scotland example of Discord on the SCVO website? Did it go on the SCVO website? I'm not sure. But if you Google it, there's some information I think on the LGBT Youth Scotland on their own website about how they've been using Discord, and they've basically created a safe place for their communities on there, and that's been really useful, and that's used by a lot of people in the gaming community. So for a lot of young people, that's a platform they're aware of already. Bernardo's been using WhatsApp, so Siobhan pointed out that's there's a link in there for how they've been using that. And my biggest bit of advice is speak to the young people that you're working with and get a flavour for what are the tools that they're using, and then respond to that. I will be very amazed if any of them have even touched Webex with a barge pole, let alone heard of it. I'll be really amazed. And just out of interest, where did the advice come from to use it?
It was a local, funnily enough, it was a local authority, because it wouldn't have been my first choice, because I don't find it very user friendly when I'm trying to share my screen and deliver, because it's free has I've been delivering, and then also cook along nutrition sessions as well. So yeah, it was the council that had recommended that.
Yeah. So Siobhan's put a link there to the LGBT Discord platform. One of the things I would say that would be the big turn off if I was using Webex to try and connect to that audience is probably 95% of those young people will be using a device that looks like that, or maybe a tablet at a push. I would be very, very amazed if Webex will work on a pay-as-you-go Android phone. Checking it, but I'd be very, very surprised if it works. So for me, one of the things to check is, what are they using already, but what's going to work across the devices that they're using. So it might just be running a really simple, quick session online to get a flavour for what platforms are they comfortable with, and actually what devices are they using, and then letting that influence those next steps. And using, what are people using out there already. So that example from Bernardo is an LGBT Youth Scotland. But again, it's maybe a decision that someone needs to take in your organisation and think about how you can safeguard young people and what that's going to look like. John or Siobhan, any thoughts on that specifically?
Just really quick thought throw in is we're probably about to say the same thing, is to step back a bit and think, well, what's the risk you're trying to prevent? So I guess the main thing is making sure that it's only young people joining the session that you're trying to run, and that some random person couldn't get the link and somehow join it, or that young people are, one thing with Zoom is you have breakout rooms, but you'd have to think through the safeguarding implications of that a young person isn't being harassed or anything like that during an online session. So really it's about understanding what are the problems you're trying to prevent, and almost any video platform will have features that help you mitigate those. It's just a question of being confident that you know how to use them. And I think one problem from the public sector is they can take this quite monolithic view and just say, oh, brand X is safe, brand Y is not, when actually it's more of a challenge about how are you using it, and are you making sure to have the controls in place. So for example, the webinar sessions that we run from kind of April time, they've been pre-registration to kind of safeguard against non-charity people joining and trying to disrupt the meeting. So it's about having those procedures in place. And I would agree with Ross in that you need to do a bit of research and see what people are comfortable using, because I guess the point is at this stage, they will probably all have used 2 or 3, and they'll have one that they can say, yes, this is one that's going to be easy for me to use. And that plus some procedures would do the job, I would think.
I think for us, it's because our sessions are 2 hours generally, so we need, and I couldn't deliver on WhatsApp just because of the nature. I need to share a screen and whatnot, so it's just finding that correct platform. But it's good because obviously we're paying a monthly subscription, so as well, so we need to obviously make sure that they were comfortable using our kind of platform as well. But it was more the child protection one that I was kind of concerned about. But that's been great. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to finish up there because I am conscious of time. We've got our next DigiShift coming up soon, so if you book via the SCVO events page, you can get on there and grab a free ticket for that one. The other thing we're just asking people today is if you use the subtitles. So if you can just use the chat box and put in yes if you use the subtitles. So we've always got closed captions available in calls for anyone who uses it. So if you did use it, you just type in yes in the chat box. That'd be really useful for us to just get a flavour of how many people are using it on the call. Final thing just to say as well is we have the Curve training. So we have 2 workshops per week. So video, the Catalyst, RS McDonald Charitable Trust and Health and Social Care Alliance. So 2 free digital skills training workshops per week at the moment, and you can join us on those. I think that is pretty much it, unless Siobhan, John, have any final words of wisdom?
I think for this call, it would probably be just highlighting service recipes, because I think they help you see how somebody's put a certain system together. But also just harking back to Andrew's point about, do think about how systems need to work together, because it could be quite easy to pick up something as a short-term fix, but that could still work problems for later. So service recipes are quite good because they have a good illustration of how an organization has put something together and what it's worked with as well.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, so the recipes go far beyond case studies and just give you those kind of practical steps. So for me, they're probably one of the most useful things that's come out of COVID in terms of all the work that we've been involved in. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you'll join us on the next DigiShift. So thanks again to our speakers. So Laura from Belleville Community Garden, Aidan from Storehouse Belfast, Ian from Linlithgow Family, and Andrew from Wellhouse Centre in Huddersfield. Thank you so much. It was really useful. Really, really good talks today.